Belgian Congo and Rwanda, Burundi, you never vaccinated anybody personally.
That is correct. I also stopped in Kikwit, which was to observe a vaccination campaign.
And that was between what cities?
Well, geographically, it's between Leopoldville and Stanleyville. I don't recall in what order I visited it.
You don't know if it was before or after Stanleyville?
No, I don't.
How long were you in Kikwit?
Well, just a day or two.
And that was just to observe a
Vaccination campaign.
Did you observe a vaccination campaign in any of the other cities?
Stanleyville, probably. Leopoldville was, as I said before, to collect data from prior vaccination.
Okay. And what were you doing in Rwanda, Urundi?
Talking to people.
Again, about polio vaccine?
Yes.
But not vaccinating anybody?
No.
Not part of any vaccination campaign there either?
No.
Okay. Do you believe that someone can have a valid religious objection to refusing a vaccine?
No.
Do you take issue with religious beliefs?
Yes.
Okay. You have said that, quote, vaccination is always under attack by religious zealots who believe that the will of God includes death and disease.
Yes.
You stand by that statement?
I absolutely do.
Okay. Are you an atheist?
Yes.
Okay. Do you accept that some people hold religious beliefs that are inherently unprovable?
Yes, I'm sure they do.
Okay. You said that, quote, vaccination is always under attack by a legal system that profits from the failure of most people to understand risk-benefit ratios or public health issues. Correct?
Yes.
Can you explain what you mean by that shortly?
I mean that the risk from vaccines, for example, is considerably less than the risk from disease, but people don't necessarily understand that. It's similar to the situation where people may not fly, but they're willing to drive in cars, where the risks are much higher. And what was the second point about?
Public health issues.
Public health issues, yes. Not understanding the importance of a high vaccination coverage in prevention of disease.
One child can make a difference?
One child probably doesn't make a difference, but a collection of one child's do make a difference.
At the most recent ACIP meeting, you spoke and gave ACIP 3 pieces of advice, correct?
Yes.
Right. One of them was to conduct more vaccine safety studies to prove the anti-vaccinationists wrong, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. If the science to prove vaccines safe already exists, why would more safety studies be needed to prove the anti-vaccinationists wrong?
Because there are so many people, as you can see on the web, who have these beliefs about vaccines, and as we have discussed throughout this long day, it would be valuable to have more safety data.
Like a vaccinated versus unvaccinated study, correct?
If such a study is feasible.
Okay. Shouldn't vaccine safety studies be done for the sake of making vaccines safer, not for the purpose and with the predetermined objective of proving so-called anti-vaccinationists wrong?
Oh, absolutely. I do not deny that there are known reactions to vaccines. Fortunately, they are rarely serious, but I support more research on every aspect of vaccines.
And your claim that they're rarely serious is from your book, right?
Yes.
Okay. When's the last time that you received a vaccine, Dr. Plotkin?
Influenza vaccine. Actually, not more than several weeks ago.
Do you get the flu shot every year?
Yes.
You ever missed a year?
No.
Have you received the zoster vaccine? It sounds like you have.
Yes.
The what vaccine?
The zoster, ZOSTER. When did you receive that?
I've received now 2 doses, and I'm looking forward to receiving the new zoster vaccine as soon as I can buy it.
Have you received a PCV13 vaccine?
Yes.
Have you received a PPSV23 vaccine?
Yes.
Hep B vaccine?
Yes.
Let me do that again. Have you received a Hep B vaccine?
Yes.
Yeah. Have you received a hepatitis A vaccine?
Yes.
Have you received a MEN ACWY or MPS V4 vaccine?
I believe so. That was a long time in the past because those vaccines have been available for a long time. I'd have to check my records, but I think particularly when I traveled to Africa, I believe I took it.
Have you received a MEN B vaccine?
Not yet, no.
Have you received a Hib vaccine?
Oh, Hib, well, I was long past the age of Hib when it was developed.
When's the last time you got a tetanus diphtheria containing vaccine?
Oh, within the last 10 years. I don't remember exactly when, but
Do you think all adults should be required to receive all vaccines on the CDC's adult immunization schedule?
That's somewhat of a difficult question because adults, of course, have the ability to make their own decisions. Tetanus is a vaccine that, how shall I put it? I guess it's a choice whether you're willing to be susceptible to tetanus or not. For pertussis, I think there's increasing reason to say that all adults should be vaccinated against pertussis. So it's, let's say, open to discussion at this point for DTAP anyway.
You'd support a law that would require adults to get the DTAP?
At this point, 2017, I wouldn't insist on that for all adults. I would insist on it for children and adolescents. But the data, the reason I say that is because the data showing protection against pertussis in older adults is really not that solid, not that available.
Did you ever experience an adverse vaccine reaction?
Personally?
Yes.
No.
Have you ever witnessed someone experience an adverse vaccine reaction?
I've witnessed people fainting after vaccination.
Anything else?
Certainly I've seen people complain of pain at the injection site. And in the rubella days, women complaining of joint pains after vaccination. I think that's it.
When you say fainting, after what vaccine was that?
Oh, actually, that was tetanus, as I recall. It was a high school athlete.
Do you know anyone that's experienced a serious adverse reaction? And
Personally, no.
Yeah. Did your grandchildren receive the hepatitis B vaccine on the first day of life as recommended by the
course.
CDC?
I'm sorry, say the question again.
Yeah. I asked if his grandchildren have your grandchildren received the hepatitis B vaccine on the first day of life as recommended by the CDC? And he answered yes. Do you think there's a safe threshold of how many vaccines can be administered at one time?
My answer to that is I don't know. I don't think there's any evidence that the 6 that are currently generally given together is a problem. So I don't know if eventually there's some theoretical threshold, but I am not aware of any evidence for that yet.
Okay. But before you would say, for example, getting 30 vaccines on one day was safe, you'd probably want to get the data to support it?
Yes.
Okay. That data doesn't yet exist, obviously, right?
No.
Okay. Do you intend to appear at trial in this matter to testify?
No, I do not.
Do you intend to appear via video conference to testify in this trial?
Well,
For
I
this
haven't
case?
been asked. I suppose I might consider a video conference, but no one has asked me, and I'm not, I would say, very inclined to do that. And you know, while we're on the tape, so to speak, I want to stipulate, since you were so interested in my income, that I'm doing this pro bono.
Mm-hmm. But as you sit here today, you're still receiving remuneration from all 4 major vaccine makers, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And from... Okay. So, we're getting close to the end. Okay. I don't have much left. A few more. There was a controversy revolving around the origin of AIDS and the OPV vaccine, correct?
Yes.
You disputed any connection between OPV vaccine and AIDS in 2 papers submitted to the Royal Society, in which you stated, quote, there was no gun, the chimpanzees, no bullet, the virus, no shooter, a manufacturer of the vaccine chimpanzee cells, right, and no motive to use chimp cells or to hide the fact. Correct?
Yeah, I also said that the only smoke was created by Mr. Hooper.
Right. Who's that?
He's a British journalist, which puts him at the lower end of journalism.
I'm going to mark this. Dr. Plotkin, I'm going to hand you what's been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 44. And I'm also going to hand you what's been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 45.
Yeah.
Okay. Are these the 2 papers that you submitted to the Royal Society?
Yes.
Disputing, 1 second please, disputing any connection between the OPV vaccine and AIDS,
Yes.
right? Okay. Is everything that you wrote in these 2 articles, strike that, is everything written in the 2 articles, Royal Society articles that you submitted, which are marked as exhibits 40, 44 and 45, true?
Well, I certainly hope so.
Is that, I'm sorry, Dr. Plotkin, is that yes?
Yes. Yes, and I should also add that my conclusions have been verified by other scientists who now have shown that HIV originated in the 1920s in Cameroon.
At the end of which one was 44 and 45?
Correct.
Sorry. Okay. Dr. Dr. Plotkin, at the end of Exhibit 44, the article entitled Untruths and Consequences, you state that, strike that. I apologize. I sorry, Dr. Plotkin. Can you look at Exhibit 45? I'm sorry. At the end of Exhibit 45, it states that letters cited in this paper will be deposited in the library of the College of Physicians of Philadelphia or the University of Leuven, correct?
Yes.
That's Leuven. Have you deposited those letters and papers?
I have, yes.
Okay, when did you deposit all of those letters and papers?
Oh gosh, it's probably at least 5 years ago now.
So all of the letters cited in this document have been deposited in
The
where?
College of Physicians of Philadelphia.
And they're in possession of all of the letters cited in this document?
Well, I believe so. I have to go over the list, but that certainly was my intention, and I believe I have done so.
Okay. Is that publicly available at the University of Philadelphia?
That's a good question. I imagine so. I deposited them there basically so that they could be examined after I'm dead. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never been asked.
Okay. If they're not publicly available, would you provide copies?
Well, I have to ask the College of Physicians to do that.
Would you authorize them to release copies?
I'd authorize them, sure.
Okay. If you could please take a look at the...
I'm not sure why you're asking the question. Are you
I'm asking the
accusing me
question...
of launching AIDS, or what is the point?
Absolutely not, Dr. Plotkin. You made a promise in here to deposit papers, and I'm purely asking you if you fulfilled that promise.
Yes, I did.
That's it. That's all. Yeah. Okay. I'm not accusing you of anything. And in the other paper entitled Untruths and Consequences, in the second paragraph, it says, the evidence I present is based on papers and documents of the time for my personal files. Have those also been deposited in the Library of Philadelphia?
No, certainly not all of them. I have extensive files. I don't throw anything out.
So you still have all of those?
Yes.
I assume you don't have an issue sharing copies of those?
No, my wife would love to get rid of all of them, but
Okay.
I don't.
So you said that the AIDS OPV hypothesis hypothesis has been disproven, correct?
Yes.
Okay. A few quick questions. Just approximately how many human samples that predate 1959 have been tested for HIV?
That predate 1959. I don't know that there are any such samples available. The first samples that I recall being available were from 1960, and they had already some HIV seropositive individuals, but that was in Leopoldville, and they were individuals who had not received the oral polio vaccine.
Mm-hmm. So, but in terms of samples that predate 1959, have there been any such samples tested for HIV?
I I have to think about that. Oh, well, there have been samples from elsewhere in the world, but from the Belgian Congo,
Yeah.
I don't think that any such samples have been available.
Are you aware of whether there currently exist any samples of polio vaccine that was in the Belgian Congo at any time between 1959 and 1960?
Whether the Wistar has kept them or not, I don't know. Fortunately, at the time of the Royal Society, I was able to go to Wistar and find specimens that had been used in the Congo, or from the same lot that had been used in the Congo. But whether that still exists or not, I have no idea.
Well, I'm curious, is there any samples that were actually in the Belgian Congo that you're aware of?
That were tested?
That were tested?
I really don't know the answer to that question. The vaccine that was used, the oral polio vaccine that was used, I believe was entirely used up in the vaccination campaign. So I don't think it's likely that material used in the vaccination campaign was repatriated. But fortunately, we had material from the same lots that were used in the Congo, and that had been retained at the Wistar.
But as far as you're aware, in terms of actual samples, a sample that was actually in the Belgian Congo, are you saying you're not aware of any such sample?
No, I'm not aware of any such sample.
Do you know if any such sample are you aware of any such sample that existed after 1960?
I'm not aware that anything existed.
Okay. I just have another question on this. Just curious. So, are you familiar with an article entitled Vaccination with the Chat Strain of Type 1 Attenuated Poliomyelitis Virus in Leopoldville,
Yes.
Belgian Congo?
Yes.
Okay. In the article, you're one of the authors of the article?
Yes.
Okay. Where is it? Oh, so on page 2 of this article, it states the titer of the vaccine after a day's use was checked periodically by sending frozen
Aliquots, yes.
Thank you. Aliquots to the ALIQUOTS to the Wistar Institute, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, USA.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Well, it means that in order to be sure that the vaccine used still contained enough virus, they sent back samples to be titered for the quantity of virus.
So they sent back samples of the oral
Yes.
polio being used
Yes.
in the Belgian Congo.
Yes.
And they did that periodically.
Yes.
But to your knowledge, none of those survived after 1960?
No, I think they were tested and then discarded.
Okay.
I mean, aside from legal value, they would have had no value because they were used. They could not ever be used again, so they would have been discarded.
It'd be helpful for you if some of those were saved, right?
It would have been, yes, but at the time, nobody thought about that.
Right. If such a sample were to have survived someplace
Yeah.
on the planet, where would you think that would be?
Difficult to say. I mean, the laboratory in Stanleyville no longer exists. I have no idea where it could be. Yeah,
Do you think such a sample will ever be located?
I doubt it.
Last question on this topic, and we'll move on. Did you or any of your Y-Star colleagues ever carry any human cells, such as WISH or WI1 or polio vaccines grown in such human cells to the Belgian Congo?
No. Well, at least I certainly have not.
Okay. Are you aware of any such
No.
vaccines
I am not aware of
being...
any. No, I am not aware of those cells being carried to the Congo. If they had been, it would have been for experimental purposes, certainly not for vaccination purposes.
So you're not aware they're being carried or used there, right?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay. Isn't it true that in 2014 the FDA announced, quote, although individuals immunized with an acellular pertussis vaccine may be protected from disease, they may still become infected with the bacteria without always getting sick and are able to spread infection to others, end quote.
Yes, that's on the basis of the studies in baboons.
Okay, that's the Warfel study?
Yes.
All right, and we discussed earlier that the baboons would probably be the best surrogates for humans, right?
Yes.
Because you couldn't ethically expose humans to pertussis, correct?
Right.
So the Warfel studies would be the best evidence
What
as
study are you calling it?
Warfel, WARFEL. Would the Warfel studies, the one in 2014 and 2016, which were conducted by the FDA, correct?
Yes.
Those would be the best evidence as to the ability as to whether or not a cellular pertussis vaccine prevents infection and transmission of pertussis, correct?
Yes.
And I think we talked about this earlier. In your estimation, what % of adults would you say are actually immune to pertussis?
It's a very good question, and I don't know the answer to that because immunity to pertussis is complex. And so just measuring serum wouldn't necessarily give you a firm idea as to what percentage of adults are immune. But judging from the frequency of pertussis in adults, I don't think the immunity level is very high, because clearly adults are getting pertussis.
Could you estimate what percentage of the adult population in the United States you think is immune to pertussis?
Immune? Well, I think probably 50–60% could be immune, but it's difficult because immunity wanes.
Right.
And so people become susceptible again. And as I've said now twice, there is a lot of pertussis in adults. That's been shown. So quite a significant proportion of adults are susceptible and not immune.
50 to 60% is your highest estimation,
Yes.
It sounded like, right?
Yes.
No more than that.
I don't think so.
Okay. The diphtheria vaccine creates antibodies only to a toxin released by the diphtheria bacteria, correct?
Correct.
It doesn't create any antibodies to the actual diphtheria bacteria itself.
Yes, that's true, but it is also true, it certainly appears to be true, that if the organism can't produce a toxin, it has a great difficulty in surviving. And so the observation is that where the vaccine is used, the organism disappears. Mm-hmm. So it's very difficult to find it in the US, for example, but in Russia, where vaccination has not been always complete, there are still cases of diphtheria.
How do you define anti-vaccinationists or anti-vaxxers as you've used them here today?
How do I define them?
Yeah, what does that mean to you? You use those terms, and I'm actually not
There are
exactly sure what you
people-
mean by that.
People opposed to vaccination for a variety of reasons, some of which are based on false inferences from scientific data.
If somebody were opposed to vaccines because they believed there was insufficient data for them to make a decision about the actual risks, not the benefits, but the risks, would you consider that person an anti-vaxxer?
If they refuse to be vaccinated themselves or refuse to have their children vaccinated, I would call them an anti-vaccination person, yes.
Is there anybody who could refuse a vaccine who you would not label anti-vaxxer?
Yes, if there are individuals who are immunosuppressed, for example, and therefore have a contraindication to certain vaccines, that to me would be a reasonable decision on their part.
But otherwise, you believe that anybody else who refuses a vaccine is doing so based on misinformation?
Generally speaking, yes. Now, as I said before, I can imagine an adult deciding that they don't want the advantages of vaccination for whatever reason. I think the situation for children is quite different because one is making a decision for somebody else and also making a decision that has important implications for public health.
So in the case of an adult, you think it's okay for the adult to make a decision for themselves to take on a risk, even though it could implicate public health, but not the case for a child?
You know, it depends. For example, if you're a healthcare worker and you refuse to be vaccinated against diseases that you could potentially transmit to patients, I don't think you should have the option of making that decision.
Earlier we discussed that there hasn't been a wild case of polio in the United States since 1979, correct?
Right.
Okay. The United States currently only uses inactivated polio vaccine, right?
Yes.
It does not
Sorry, say it again. The United States
only uses inactivated polio vaccine, correct?
Yes.
The United States does not use oral polio vaccine, correct?
Correct.
Okay. If there were an outbreak of polio in the United States,
Yes.
isn't it true that we would have to return to using oral polio vaccine to stop the spread of polio in the United States?
It might well be the case. However, individuals who have received the inactivated vaccines will not themselves get polio. They may get infected and transmit to others, which is one of the reasons why one might resort to OPV. But the individual himself would not be susceptible.
Is that because the IPV creates IgG antibodies in the blood
Yes.
but it doesn't create IgA immunity in the intestinal tract?
Correct.
And it is in the intestinal tract where the polio virus
Yes.
multiplies, correct?
Yes.
So a person vaccinated with IPV can still become infected and transmit polio virus, correct?
Yes, although in point of fact, IPV does protect the nasopharynx. So in this country where hygiene and sewage, et cetera, are good, the possibility of transmitting from an IPV vaccinee is much less than it is, let's say, in Africa, where sewage contamination is great.
When you say nasopharynx, what is that?
The throat.
So you're saying that IPV does create immunity within the throat?
Yes.
Okay. There are studies that show that?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And how do those studies make that determination?
Well, by culturing people who are exposed to polio, who have had IPV, and also by showing that antibody diffuses into the throat much better than it does into the gut.
In the Warfel study, I'm sorry, strike that. Do you know the names of those studies by any chance?
Oh gosh, again, they're in the book.
Are they in your book?
Yes, absolutely.
And in terms of efficacy, does IPV vaccination as a childhood last a lifetime?
You know, that's an interesting question, and I think the answer is yes. Studies that have been done have shown quite good persistence of antibody after IPV. Now, does it last forever? I can't say that, but it certainly lasts a long time.
How about 30 years after vaccination? What do you think the efficacy is, approximately?
I would just be totally speculating, but I think most people would still be protected because you don't need much antibody against polio to be protected. Levels of dilutions of 1 to 4 or 1 to 8 are probably protective.
But you're not sure.
I'm not sure about 30 years. I'm sure about the levels that are protective.
Right, but 30 years, you're not sure about what percent of the people vaccinated are still immune to polio.
No, but I do know that persistence is good, and that the likelihood is that most people, even 30 years, will still be protected.
40 years?
I can't really guess any more than that.
Okay, the data doesn't exist.
No, I
Okay.
don't believe they exist.
Well, what do you estimate is the current efficacy of the mumps vaccine shortly after vaccination?
Oh, shortly after vaccination, there's no doubt that the efficacy is high. It's 80, 90%. And after 2 doses, immediately after 2 doses, the efficacy is very high. Unfortunately, the efficacy diminishes with time, and that has caused a problem in universities that have outbreaks of mumps because the college kids are
No longer immune?
intimately associated. Yes,
Associated?
intimately associated, although the efficacy even then is probably in the order of 70, 80%.
70, 80%. What about 30 years after vaccination? What's the efficacy?
I have no idea.
20 years?
I don't think studies have been done more than 10 years after vaccine.
What do you estimate is the current efficacy of the rubella vaccine 10 years after vaccination?
Based on the data that are available, it is very high. The so-called B-cell memory after rubella vaccine, I'm happy to say, is very good.
How about 20 years?
I think it'll still be present.
30 years?
I think so.
High efficacy still, you think?
I think so.
But no study's been done.
Actually, there are studies, at least 20-year studies. I'm not sure about 30, but immunity is very long-lasting.
And, okay. And the studies would be in your book?
Yes.
What would you estimate is the current efficacy of the measles vaccine 20 years after vaccination?
Well, again, it appears to be quite good. 20 years, again, I don't have in my head a study done 20 years later, but certainly studies done some time after vaccination have shown good persistence of antibodies. And once again, you don't need a whole lot of antibody to prevent you from getting measles.
Do you know a percentage
Of
of people that are still immune 20 years out from the measles vaccine?
not off the top of my head, but I feel relatively sure that it's quite high.
Is it important to get a tetanus vaccine?
Well, it's important if you don't want to get tetanus, yes.
The tetanus vaccine was introduced into routine childhood schedule in the late 1940s, correct?
Yes.
when the tetanus vaccine was introduced, there were only about 4 cases of tetanus per million people, correct?
If you say so. I don't remember.
You familiar with what the CDC Pink Book?
Yes.
If the CDC book said that it was 4 cases of tetanus per million, would you dispute
Okay.
that?
Well, I'll accept that.
You do accept that. And that's just the number of cases, not deaths,
Yes.
right? Okay. And you think it's a public health imperative for people to be vaccinated against tetanus, correct?
I think it's the wise thing to do if you don't want to be under risk of getting tetanus if you have an injury.
Okay. To prevent something that was a few cases in a million, correct?
Yes, but a deadly disease.
Do we know whether the tetanus vaccine causes more or less than a few cases of serious adverse reactions after vaccination?
I don't believe it causes a whole lot of serious reactions, no.
I'm going to show you what's...
Do you know how much longer we have to go, just so I have an idea?
Yeah, sure. I think that we've only got about 15 more minutes.
That's exactly how much we have left.
Perfect.
So we should be, we're almost done. Can I get a sticker? Okay. 64. The CDC and FDA maintain something called the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, correct?
Yes.
And that's where anybody, including doctors, can go and report what they believe to be an adverse reaction from a vaccine.
Right,
Right?
correct.
There's no, anybody can submit a report, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And the FDA and CDC compile that data and make it available online, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to hand you a what's been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 46. Okay. And this is a printout of the VAERS data for all adverse reactions reported to tetanus-containing vaccines in the last 10 years. If you take a look, do you see that in the last 10 years there have been 985 deaths reported
Yes.
to have followed any tetanus-containing vaccine?
Yes.
That would average to about 98.5 reports of death per year
Yes.
over the last 10 years. Okay. And there's also 23,981 emergency room or office visits after tetanus-containing vaccine in the last 10 years.
Yes.
And it also lists, I'll just last one, 1,256 permanent disabilities reported after tetanus-containing vaccine in the last 10 years, correct?
Yes.
That would be about an average of 125 per
Yes.
year, right? But we don't, because these are just reports and not done in some kind of randomized controlled study, we don't actually know whether or not the tetanus vaccine is causing these deaths and permanent disabilities, correct?
Correct.
Okay. But it's possible it could be, correct?
Anything's possible, yes.
Anything's possible. Okay. Don't you think a study should be done to determine? Strike that. Strike that. Isn't it true that VAERS only receives a tiny fraction of the reportable adverse events after vaccination?
Well, I can't give you a percentage, but all physicians are asked to report putative reactions to the VAERS system. So I don't think the VAERS system covers a tiny portion of alleged reactions. I think rather probably most are reported, but I cannot confirm that.
Dr. Plotkin, I'm going to show you what's been marked as plaintiff's exhibit. (47). This is a report entitled Electronic Support for Public Health Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, correct?
Say it again.
Electronic Support for Public Health dash Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, correct? Let me know when you're ready, Dr. Plotkin.
Well, I'm ready.
Okay. The title of this report, Dr. Plotkin, is Electronic Support for Public Health Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And this was a study conducted by Harvard Medical School and the Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And it was done via a grant from an agency within HHS, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the purpose of this study was to attempt to automate VAERS reporting.
Yes.
The reason that Harvard did this study and the reason that HHS paid for it, if you look at page 6,
Yes.
do you see where it says fewer than it's right in the middle paragraph, fewer than 1% of vaccine adverse events are reported?
Well, yes, I see the statement. I don't see the reference, but
Okay. Well, let's take a look at the
Yeah.
results of that study then. If you go to the first sentence on the page that you're on right now,
yeah.
where it says results, isn't it true that it says preliminary data were collected from June 2006 through October 2009 on 715,000 patients,
Yes.
and 1.4 million doses of 45 different vaccines were given to 376,452 individuals.
Yes.
So about 376,000 individuals received a vaccine, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Out of these doses, 35,570 possible reactions were identified, correct?
Yes.
So out of 376,000 people that received vaccines, they identified 35,570 possible reactions, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
And now,
well, it's out of 1.4 million, which is 2.6%.
doses, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Meaning maybe some individuals had
More than one vaccine.
reactions at different times to different vaccines, right?
Yes.
Maybe some people were more susceptible to a vaccine reaction, and so they had a reaction every time they had a vaccine, right?
Well, we don't know that.
We don't know. I mean, assuming that each individual only had one vaccine reaction, then 10% of the individuals would have had a vaccine reaction.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right. So, now, at the beginning of this study, the CDC was cooperating with these grant recipients, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and they helped define what is an adverse reaction, right?
Yes.
And they helped define the algorithms to use. Right?
Yes.
And they also helped to define what reports should be excluded, correct?
I guess so.
Okay. What events, I'm sorry, should be excluded. from being considered, reportable, right? Okay.
Yes.
After, however, they collected this data and they generated these 35,000 reports, they then wanted to submit those reports to VAERS and automate it so that those reports could continue to be submitted, correct?
Yes.
But the CDC wouldn't cooperate with them, correct?
Well, I have no idea whether that's true or not.
On page 5, Dr. Plotkin, at the end of the second paragraph, it says does it say real data transmission of non-physician approved reports to the CDC were unable to commence by the end of this by the end of this project, the CDC had yet to respond to multiple requests to partner for this activity. Is that what it says?
That's what it says.
Okay. So, and this study says that less than 1% of adverse events are reported to VAERS, right?
Well, I have to check that, but I think that's correct.
Okay. Are you aware that there are other governmental reports that make similar estimates for VAERS?
I'm aware that not everything is reported to VAERS, yes.
Okay. But are you aware that governmental reports show that that governmental reports like this one show that the rate of reporting to VAERS is extremely low, and in this instance, they'd say Harvard said less than 1%.
Yes, apparently, yes.
Okay.
However, it has to be reminded that reporting to VAERS is supposed to occur whether or not you think there's been a reaction. So whether or not the reactions are true or not is not something the VAERS decides.
Right. Where's the data? The VAERS data one. Okay. But let's just assume for a second here. So if let's go back to what's been marked as Exhibit 46. Okay. Let's assume that a full 1% of associated adverse events are reported. Wouldn't that take the number of deaths to 98,000 then? That were associated with the vaccine?
I think it's likely that deaths are reported more often than trivial reactions, so I wouldn't be able to extrapolate from that number.
Right.
But, obviously death is more dramatic.
Mm-hmm. Let me show you one final exhibit.
We have 6 minutes left on this.
Okay. I'm going to hand you what's been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 48. This is the VAERS report for all adverse events, for all vaccines, just since January of 2016. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. If this...
My wife is getting upset.
well, don't tell her you offered her up for a deposition. if this represents even 3% or 5% of reported events, doesn't this concern you in that maybe it really indicates, strike that. It reports 751 life-threatening reactions, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And that's only since January of 2016, correct?
Yes.
Okay. If that's a full 1%, then that would be 75,000 life-threatening reactions that would have been reported, correct?
That's the arithmetic, yes.
That's the kind of event that would happen pretty soon after vaccination, correct?
The events that happen after vaccination, yes.
Okay.
But not necessarily because of vaccination.
So, until a properly controlled saline placebo study is actually done, or strike that, until we compare the total health outcomes, strike that. Would you support a study that compared total health outcomes between vaccinated and unvaccinated children, Dr. Plotkin?
Will I support such a study? Yes. If the protocol was scientifically valid, yes, I would support such a study. I don't really put much faith into the VAERS system for a number of reasons, some of which you cited. I put much more confidence in the vaccine safety data, which are better controlled and which come from institutions that see large numbers of patients.
Mm-hmm. Would you work to support such a study?
Again, if such a study were scientifically feasible, I would support it, yes.
Don't you want to know what the results of that study show?
If the study is done, yes, of course. Mm-hmm.
In terms of the vaccine safety data link, which you just mentioned, that's not available to the public, correct?
Oh, I think they publicly report in the scientific literature what they
Independent
find.
researchers want to get access to the VSD. Well,
I don't know what the circumstances are regarding access to data. I simply don't know.
I won't ask you questions about that if you don't know it.
2 minutes.
Okay.
Pause the tape for a second.
Why?
I'm trying to pause the tape for a second. So it doesn't run out.
No, that's all right. Is there something you want to check?
Something to check real quick.
Hmm?
I'm just gonna check my notes real quick.
Okay. Well, I'm done with my questioning, and I will, if opposing counsel intends to ask any question, then I reserve to ask some rebuttal questions as well. But otherwise, I'm done with my questioning for today.
You know what? If Dr. Plotkin's going to testify, I'm going to have him here in Michigan, so I'm not too concerned about it. Let's just call it a day. Dr. Plotkin, I'll give you a call tomorrow if you're available for a quick phone call.
Actually, no. I'll be